So I'd like to welcome all of you to the fourth installment of the Fordham University Center for Ethics Education, Ethics and Society webinar series, and the first one of the spring semester. Now, we are really excited to see so many people joining us today. And in the spirit of community and conversation, our speakers, Brenna and Carey, were especially interested in seeing where all of you are coming from. So we invite you to tell us, to introduce yourself in the chat, to tell us your affiliation or who you are, whether you're a student or a staff member at LSA, et cetera, if you are so inclined. So you can go ahead and, drop that in the chat, and we'll take a few seconds to allow people to do that. I'm going to go ahead and say a few introductory remarks. So my name is Stephen Swartzer, and I am the Associate Director for Academic Programs and Strategic Initiatives in the Center for Ethics Education. The Center for Ethics Education is directed by Dr. Celia Fisher, Fordham's Marie Ward Doty University Chair in Ethics, who established it in 1999 as an interdisciplinary cross-campus unit at Fordham. The Ethics Center embodies Fordham's commitment to intellectual excellence, social justice, and human dignity through the promotion of ethics education, research, and public dialogue. Our programs include an interdisciplinary master's degree program in ethics and society, an advanced graduate certificate program in healthcare ethics, the HIV and Drug Abuse Prevention Research Ethics Training Institute, an undergraduate bioethics minor, and intercollegiate and high school ethics bowl programs. In addition to these programs, we also offer public-facing ethics and social justice programming that engages people in conversation about a variety of topics of contemporary social import, such as today's discussion about Mutuality and Barrio, stories of LSA Family Health Services. Now, I should also note that some of the work for this project was supported through our center's Ethics, Health Equity, and Social Justice Summer Faculty Research Grant, which was made possible through Marie Ward Doty University Chair in Ethics Endowment. So now I'm pleased to introduce our two presenters for today. So I'm very excited to welcome Carey Kasten, who is an associate professor of Spanish at Fordham, specializing in contemporary Spanish culture, with an eye toward how politics and the arts interact in the Spanish nation's past and present, and to posit new ideas for future relations between the state and the national culture industry. Her current research focuses on early fascism and the avant-garde in Spain. She received her BA from Skidmore College and PhD from Columbia University. I am also very excited to welcome Brenna Moore, who is a professor of theology at Fordham, specializing in the area of modern Christianity, with a focus on Catholic intellectual cultural history in Europe. She is particularly interested in questions concerning women, gender, and religion, mysticism and spirituality, a movement in theology known as ressourcement, and the various Catholic responses to modernity. Brenna also serves on the board of directors of LSA Family Health Services, which we're going to be hearing more about today. She received her BA from the University of Colorado and her master's and doctoral degrees from Harvard Divinity School. So I also do hope that those of you who are in the audience will be part of the conversation, and we're excited to include questions and contributions from the audience. So after Carey and Brenna present their work, we will open it up to a moderated Q&A and conversation with the audience. If you have a question for our speakers along the way, you're welcome to include it in the chat or to send it to me as a private chat. Or you're welcome to hold your question until the discussion portion and ask it yourself. All right, and now with no further ado, I will hand it over to Brenna and Carey.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stephen, for the lovely introduction. And it's just wonderful to see so many names and markers of identity here in the chat. So welcome to people joining us from LSA. I see some of our former researchers on here and collaborators, and many Fordham students, faculty members, PhD, undergraduates. So what a wonderful collection of community here gathered to talk about all the wonderful things Carey and I have learned in the course of our research about this wonderful community, LSA Family Health Services in East Harlem. And I am just going to briefly say a couple words of introduction. Carey, then we have some pictures to show you, and we'll talk about our research. But yes, I'm a professor of theology, and Carey and I have been in the process of writing this book about the history of Little Sisters of the Assumption in East Harlem, and particularly their work with young mothers in the neighborhood. And we had a wonderful fortune from a woman who previously worked at LSA, Ingenia Garcia, who had the names of about 40 women who were willing to be in relationship with us and be interviewed by us about how their engagement and experiences with LSA over the years had to change the course of their lives. So we had that material, and also spent many hours of conversation with former and current staff of Little Sisters of the Assumption in East Harlem, and looked at their archives, their newspaper records. And so it's been a really labor of love over the past couple of years. And not just Carey and I, but we had a team of student researchers, undergraduates and students from the School of Social Work. And many of you we've talked with many of you over the course, so some of you already know quite a bit about this project. But we're thrilled to be nearing the finish line, not done, but nearing the finish line. And the book is going to be coming out with Fordham University Press's series called the Empire State series, which is a fabulous, very public-facing series that the press has about the cultural, political, and religious history of New York. And I was involved with the press years ago, and I knew that I wanted our book to be with this press. And it's such a Fordham project. Carey and I teach at different departments in the university. We've been so lucky to be supported by our Office of Community Engaged Learning. The work of LSA Family Health Services is so connected to our mission, our Jesuit mission around service and justice. And so we're thrilled to take it to the finish line with the Fordham University Press. So that's just a little bit about me, but you'll hear a lot more about our research. But I'll just turn it briefly to Carey, and then she'll show some of our images so you can see who we're talking about.
I don't have much to add except to say that I'm overwhelmed by the showing of people that are here. I think it's an amazing testament to this kind of work that I kind of fell into, and I'm so grateful to the center, and especially to Stephen for supporting this work and for making it part of for showcasing this work at Fordham for all the reasons that Brenna said. I think it's exemplary of the kinds of collaborations that can happen here at Fordham and also with the community. Yeah, that's all I'll say for now. I just am honestly overwhelmed by the number of people here. So thank you for showing up. I'm going to share my screen. And Brenna and I have some images. We thought it would be easier to show images at the beginning of the presentation so that then people who aren't familiar with the work of LSA can see some of the work that LSA does, have an image in their head while we talk about some of the work that we did in telling this story. So just gonna go here, and oops, I have a very sensitive mouse. We can narrate as we go through, but Brenna, you made this slide, but I think you just wanted to show exactly where LSA is in relationship to our two campuses, right? That it's right in between. It sits in East Harlem. And you see the Fordham campus on the north end, the Rose Hill campus on the north end, and the Lincoln Center campus on the south end. And then that little dot right along the East River is where LSA Family Health Services is located on East 115th Street.
Yes, and so I think, I just think it's important to start here with a map. So LSA Family Health Services is on 115th Street in East Harlem, but it's not just where they're located. They are very much a community-based organization that serves and empowers the families living in around a 20-block radius of that part of East.
Oh, did we lose Brenna? I can't. You're muted, Stephen.
Yeah, it looks like we did just lose Brenna.
We were having connection issues. Well, I can pick it up. I don't know if she'll probably email you, I assume, and get back on her phone. But what Brenna was saying is how connected to their community. We're going to see how important the local focus is in everything that LSA does in their work with families in the neighborhood, and that they will sometimes work with the family over generations, right? And it's not just kind of a quick relationship, but deep relationships that are really locally based. This is a picture of Sister Suzanne. I'm sure Brenna would want to be here to say this, but Sister Suzanne passed away this Christmas Day. And this is Melina in the center and Sister Annette on the right. And then another picture, and then Sister Margaret over here, who is also Sister Margaret is here this evening, and so is Melina. But I think that from how I see it, Sister Suzanne's passing in some ways has reinvigorated much of the mission for many of the staff at LSA to really reconnect, to strengthen kind of their original mission and mutuality that we're going to talk about this evening. But these images are important because all of these people feature in our story. Was she able to get back on, Stephen, or we're still waiting?
She was briefly back on, but now I believe we've lost her again.
Okay, let me go forward. This is a picture of Inhinia. This is the woman that Brenna mentioned briefly, who really made possible our connection with these mothers. Inhinia was the head of the PCD program, the Parent-Child Development Program at LSA, working with these women, and developed relationships of just longstanding trust, so much so that they were willing to share their contact information with us and give these very detailed, long interviews with us. This is a picture. I do wish Brenna were here. This is more of her area of research, but this is a picture of the old building before LSA.
We do have her back now, actually.
We do. You want to take it, Brenna?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for that, everybody. I am on campus and Fordham's Wi-Fi has just been a bit sketchy. So I'm using my phone, which I don't like to do, but Stephen, I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up? Is this really good? Okay. Okay, thank you so much. I really apologize for that. Yeah, so we basically wanted just to see, wanted you all to see the incredible, beautiful people that we're going to be talking about from the past and the present. And I saw Carey showed the picture of some of the sisters, in particular, Sister Suzanne LaChapelle. And I know that she had mentioned that Sister Suzanne passed away on Christmas Day, but in many ways, she is, kind of the animating spirit of our work as we cross the finish line. And she has been working and had been working and living and serving in the neighborhood since the 1970s, and was really described by many as an icon of East Harlem, but always said herself, she never wanted to be described that way, but just felt very blessed to live in the neighborhood. And we feel so blessed that we were able to get so many of her life experiences and her stories before she passed. So this research in many ways is so dedicated to her legacy. And this here is a picture of a staff picture of from the late 1980s. So this is a building that they had in East Harlem before their building on 115th Street. So we don't need to get into a lot of, just you can see some of the people. It's a mix of lay people and sisters, some from the Order of the Little Sisters of the Assumption, some from other religious orders. And you can go to the next picture. Yes, and these are just some images from some of the service and empowerment work. This is a mother who's participating in one of the programs in the 1980s. But as you'll see, some of what makes LSA so remarkable is the work not just on serving people's basic needs for food, education, safety, but really working on what I think of as kind of the inner dimensions of human experience and empowerment. This is a sign that says, what do I do that inspires me? What do I do that connects to the people around me, and so forth? So they're always, in the past of Little Sisters of the Assumption and in the present, this sense of a kind of the attention to kind of, I'd say kind of the gentler, softer elements of human experience that really works to create empowerment and leadership, and communicate human dignity and community in the neighborhood. I just love that image. Okay, Carey. Again, just also some pictures of inside the neighborhood celebrating, inside the agency in the neighborhood celebrating a birthday, some mothers at a meeting.
These are pictures of the parent-child program in action, right? You have a speech therapist in the bottom right working one-on-one with a child, and then an outing with a group of young mothers to Central Park, and that's Gail Norman, who was a staff member. I think Gail's here too this evening. She was a staff member in the PCD program.
Mm-hmm.
This is another, this is a parent group. You see Gail up here with a group. And I believe that Gail told me that was Sister Suzanne back here, although Brenna and I were having a hard time determining. So a question maybe for the Q&A if you all want to help us. But just seeing some of the ways that the groups came together to celebrate, which was an important theme, marking occasions together. And then I think this is the last one, a group of kids. Oh no, there's one more after this, that's right. And then Brenna.
Yes, and this is just a recent picture to show we're going to be talking about some of the families and staff that were involved sometimes as much as 40, 50 years ago in East Harlem. But this is just a recent picture, I think from the agency, something this month, an event they put on around community health access. So just to show, and you could see in the images of the people and the faces, it's many mothers who live in the neighborhood, mothers with children, but not only mothers with children, but East Harlem has always been a neighborhood that has welcomed all kinds of different immigrants. And you can see kind of the changing demographics, that there have been many families, African-American families who maybe recently moved to New York City from the South. There have been waves of Puerto Rican families, Puerto Rican immigrant families. And now many of the women that we worked with were Spanish-speaking women who recently arrived from Mexico. And now there's many Spanish-speaking families who engage LSA services, but also people from all over the world. But it's like, who's making East Harlem their home at the time? Yeah, so that's it. So that just gives you a sense of just the range and the vitality of the organization. And you can just see on a map of who exactly that what we're talking about. So I'm just going to spend about maybe 15 minutes sharing a little bit of what I've learned, some of the exciting things that I've learned about the history of the organization. And Carey is a professor of Spanish, and she really spearheaded the conversation and interviews with mostly the Mexican-born Spanish-speaking women who have been involved in the services. And this is mainly, I'll say this by way of introduction, especially for the students who are the students on board on our call, that I think so many of us, and probably this is true for all of us, who are so committed to issues of social justice and committed to making a country, a city that is more inclusive, more just, more welcoming, feel like things are so bad, right now. And they do feel really bad. But our experience with Carey of talking with people who have been doing this work for so long, welcoming newcomers, trying to get the city to be more compassionate, inclusive, humane, trying to empower the little people in the city, to bring more power to ordinary people in the city. People have been doing that for so long, and it has been an incredible gift to hear their stories. And I think for all of our students, it's like our city is full of older generations of people who have so much wisdom, not just only their memories, but like real actual experiments that the city has engaged in to create more justice and inclusivity in the city. And it helps me sort of think, well, maybe just the current landscape isn't all we have. We don't have to start from scratch. There's been ideas we can build on from the past. So I hope that's just to say, when I'm talking a bit about the past, I'm really seeing resources that we might be able to consider as we continue all together to create a more just and inclusive city. So LSA is, a secular nonprofit in New York City that has been in East Harlem since 1958, that mainly, serves the needs and also empowers the families who live in East Harlem and affirms families, and committed to the belief that affirming and empowering families improves the entire community of East Harlem. But their roots are religious, which is why, I'm doing this work as a theology professor, that the LSA traces their origins to the Little Sisters of the Assumption nuns, a French order of nuns who first came to New York City from France a long, long time ago in 1891. And they served as nurses originally in the very poorest tenement houses in the Lower East Side. And some of you may know this, but, it's not that unusual for a community of nuns to have their vocation as nurses. So a lot of our hospitals were started by nuns. A lot of the healthcare in the United States, it can really trace its roots to women religious. But the Little Sisters of the Assumption were unique in that they did all of their nursing only to the poorest of the poor. So it was often to sort of immigrant neighborhoods in different parts of the world. It began in France, but very quickly their services were requested in Ireland, Latin America, New York City, all over the world. And they would go to the very, very poorest parts of the city. And they didn't build up their own institutions, hospitals, or, convents, orphanages, but they went directly into the homes of the poor to do their nursing work. And I think that's something really, really different, that they really went into homes and were very intent on kind of building individual relationships with families, getting to know families. And if we all think about it, how it is when you go into someone's home, how much more you learn about the complexities of their lives as opposed to reading about them or having them come for services at your agency. But the fact that they went into people's homes and learned about their lives. And very, very early on, in the early 1900s, some of the literature about the Little Sisters of the Assumption talks about something that is still so central to the agency that's really unique, that seeing people in the complexity of their household, dealing with often, the most precarious housing in New York City, crammed families in apartments, rats, lack of electricity, lack of resources, just dealing with intense poverty. But they would see the incredible resilience and the strength of these families. And they would talk often about, in the early literature, and we'll talk more specifically how this came a part of the agency, of just the incredible strengths of the families with whom they were in relationship. And they really started to talk very early on about developing those strengths, whether it's a simple asset like, a bond that they might detect, a mother has with her child and how they can kind of work with that bond, or, a gifts that a child might have and how, being in school could be, a particular kind of school, a way to develop that gift. And they were involved in, home nursing throughout New York City and all over the world. But Sister Margaret Leonard, who is on our Zoom call tonight, she is also a Little Sister of the Assumption nun. And she she also has her master's degree from Fordham School of Social Work, that she became the executive director of the Little Sisters of the Assumption in New York City. And she made the decision with other people in the agency, other nuns, and I'll talk about kind of how they began to grow too, made a couple of key decisions. One, knowing that they were never going to fully effectively solve the health crises of low-income New Yorkers if they were just going to do it themselves as nurses, that partnership was going to be key. They really needed to work on kind of the overall development of families' health, which connected them to, issues of, not only direct health issues, but things like clean and safe and hygienic housing, working on housing issues,
working on access to good medical care, outside of their home. So they began partnering with hospitals, with schools, with civic organizations to really, really do the work of kind of uplift of these families. And then also they decided to really, really be effective, they need to focus on one part of this vast sprawling city. And so they were invited by families and also very compelled by some creative healthcare work that was happening in East Harlem. They were invited to really start just focusing on East Harlem. So they made the decision in 1958 to focus more specifically on the work on East Harlem neighborhood in partnership with other institutions in the neighborhood. And also in 1971, Sister Margaret published an article called Mutuality as a Catalytic Power for Growth. And we, in the course of our research, really zeroed in on this word of mutuality that we saw as kind of the animating and orienting principle of the work of Little Sisters of the Assumption in East Harlem. And I'll just say a couple brief things about that before you see how this works in the lives of the women who we got to know. But mutuality is kind of akin to what we talk a lot about at Fordham, of an assets-based model of community engaged learning. I know many students on our Zoom have worked a lot with Dr. Julie Gaffney, and maybe many years ago at Fordham, we would talk about, we go out and serve, in the Bronx, or we serve in Manhattan. But now we talk a lot about finding strengths within the neighborhood and the ways in which, when we come in to partner rather than serve, but to partner with organizations and agencies and neighborhood families, we engage in a mutual relationship where we both benefit and we both grow from the relationship. And we really draw on the strengths and assets that are already kind of latent in the neighborhood. And this is sort of what was the orienting and animating spirit of LSA, is back early as the late 1950s and 60s. And there's many, many ways in which this spirit of mutuality kind of looked and spelled and revealed itself concretely through programming. But just one of the things I want to talk about before I turn it over to Carey is I think one of the most novel experiments that they did in 1971, they got a national grant from the Center on the Council of Aging. And they found a sort of untapped resource in East Harlem, which was the retired elderly Puerto Rican grandmothers who have a lot of time on their hands, but they also have a lot of knowledge about New York City, about how to navigate New York City as a Spanish speaker, how to find hospitals, schools. And the Little Sisters of the Assumption nuns hired as their first lay people, hired these Puerto Rican grandmothers to be community health workers and to sort of assist them in their work, and also become paired with a young family in the neighborhood who might be, in New York City all by themselves, overwhelmed by the city, overwhelmed how to get to the park, overwhelmed how to use the train system. And they paid these abuelas as community health workers to help these young mothers sort of stabilize and really do things like gain confidence as mothers, find the resources that they needed. And the goal was how much this kind of strengthened the capacity of the family in need, but also in the spirit of mutuality, really gave meaning and joy to these abuelas, and also, LSA paid them too. This was a nice part-time job. And this was a resounding success of Little Sisters of the Assumption. So we're talking about, though, a small grassroots organization, like 20 blocks. We're not talking about the Red Cross or anything remotely like that. There's no major corporate offices. A lot of the staff, live in the neighborhood, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But despite that kind of grassroots, the grassroots nature of LSA, this neighborhood, this abuela program was featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the National Geographic, as just incredibly effective, very, very creative work. And so now we're going to see what this looked like, for the women, the Spanish speaking women who maybe were involved in the grandmother program, but as the grandmother program as just one of many, many resources and programs at the agency that serves to empower and develop the capacity of neighborhood residents. And then we will kind of bring that together to conclude. But maybe for now, Carey, I'll just turn it over to you and you can talk about kind of what this felt like and what we heard about the experiences with these programs.
Sorry about that, rookie mistake. Since Brenna mentioned that this was such a Fordham project, I wanted to say a few words about how the project came together and how it started, because I think it is really unique. Brenna has a long-standing relationship with LSA, but I had students working at LSA many years ago. I had decided to turn my Spanish language classes into community engaged learning classes through the program that Brenna mentioned, where students through the Office of Community Engaged Learning go out and work in the community. And so it was a way for me at the time to turn my teaching into something that I felt like was more relevant for my students, that mattered more for my students. And they would go, we'd be learning about realities of Spanish speakers in New York City in class, but they'd go out in the community and work with those Spanish speakers and really learn from the experts in the community at these different community organizations. So Brenna had this research project that she wanted to work with LSA, and she approached me, and we decided that we were going to take this research forward. And Brenna already mentioned that there was a much bigger research team, and so many people are here today. But we spent about a year working together. And what was so interesting for me, some of the students here read the introduction, and I'll just say that what was interesting for me was that the community engagement taught me, when I started doing it in my teaching, how to make my teaching matter. But this project really kind of answered for me questions about how to make my research matter. And so that's been really essential for my personal kind of connection to this project. I think that one thing that also is important, since Stephen went through what my traditional research profile is that has nothing to do with this, I've been thinking long and hard about how do they connect, right? This traditional research with this kind of research. And to me, the idea of stories, right? Why do we tell stories? What's important about stories? And we tell stories so we don't forget the past. But what does it look like to make stories matter and to not forget the past? And so in understanding that, for me, it was really important to look at this Latin American genre of literature called testimonial literature or testimonial literature. And that's where voices that are typically excluded from academia are kind of centered, and they recount personal experiences, they communicate ideas of struggle and resistance. And one of the key ideas about these testimonios is that they circulate. They travel from person to person and from place to place. And as they do that, their potential increases. And so there's this possibility of transformation, personal transformation, but also structural transformation that is kind of embedded in the idea of testimonial literature. And so I think it's important for me when I think about this project to underscore, like, there's so many different stories that we're telling, right? There's this amazing story of these nuns and their organization in East Harlem and the way that they worked with the community. There's also this story of the 19 mothers that we interviewed, but I also think there's this story of our relationship, of me and Brenna, of our own research that for me brings it all kind of full circle. So with that, I'll kind of bring it back to the ideas of mutuality that what Brenna was talking about. In the book, I tell two different chapters that focus the ideas of mutuality. One is about one person, and one is about 19 people. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So let me explain how we got to this one person. When we finished about a year of doing research, I'll go back a little bit and say, Brenna and I decide to do this research project together. We write a proposal for funding. The funding comes through. We're all excited. And then the university shuts down just about 3 weeks later. And so I have no idea how, but we pushed through, and we did most of the research for this book virtually through Zoom. Our interviews were on Zoom. Our team meetings were on Zoom. And so after about a year of this, we decided that it was May, it was nice out. We'd never actually sat together in space as a research team, and that we were going to get together. And Brenna suggested, why don't we meet in East Harlem for a picnic? And so a couple of us from our research team, there were probably 7 of us, got together, and we meet in a park, and we had a nice time. It was so amazing after a year of working together to be able to share this space. And Brenna said, why don't we go over to the building? It's probably closed. There's probably nobody there, but we could just see it and have like a moment of being in front of LSA's building together. And so we walked over to the building, and lo and behold, Melina Gonzalez was there with her husband. She had stopped by to check in on something. And so if we can just take ourselves back to May, was this 21? COVID was, offices weren't opened. LSA had essential services going on, but wasn't really open. Most staff weren't in. And so Melina, it was like such a fortuitous moment. She said, well, why don't I take you in and give you a tour? Melina had a brief interview with our other faculty member from the Graduate School of Social Services who was on our team. He had interviewed her a little bit to talk about her role as a staff member. And she takes us on this tour. And it was just, I don't know, there was something about this moment of encounter. Maybe it was that we had been so siloed for so long, but she was so knowledgeable, so warm, so dedicated, and wanted to just share all these different things with us. I remember walking through the kitchen with her, walking through the PCD rooms, the parent and child rooms with her. And we spent maybe 15 minutes together, and Melina left. We walked out of the building, and Brenna and I looked at each other, and we were like, there's more there. We should really follow up. And so that's kind of how we got to this whole chapter about Melina, to introduce the idea of how mutuality is put into practice. What is the 3-phase model? Brenna said that Sister Margaret had come up with this idea, had written an article about mutuality. And Sister Margaret also came up with this 3-phase model by which mutuality would be implemented. So I'm going to share my screen again so we can see, not that. I'm not sure where it went. I might need to pull it up. Give me 1 second. Maybe I'll just not pull it up, and oh, here it is. I found it. Everybody can see that, right? Okay.
Yep.
So there's a picture of young Melina and her husband and her 2 kids when she was a client at LSA. But here's this picture from of a staff LSA flyer that explains the 3 phases of mutuality. This 3-phase model was a dynamic series of steps meant to empower clients to become increasingly responsible in all areas of their life. So from their personal lives, their family life, their role in their community, their work life, et cetera. I think this is a little bit of a simpler pared down model that one of the students on our research team developed. And so before I discuss the 3 phases, I'll just say that one of the things that mutuality really lifts up, as Brenna explained, was the idea that each person comes to the table with certain strengths and resilience, and that those need to be celebrated, right? But most of the time when a family comes to LSA, at first, they're coming for a direct need. That's phase 1. And so it's in this stage where the organization assists families with nursing services, access to schools, food, landlord disputes, tutoring, housing, job searches, et cetera. The second phase here, which is capacity and relationship building, really focuses on skill building and relationships. And so I'll just walk kind of Melina's process through from phase 1 through phase 2. Melina came to LSA as a young mother. She had come to the United States as a teenager. She had gone to high school and completed an ESL program in high school here. And when she came to LSA, one of her main needs was English. But she had done high school, like a whole ESL program. So she wasn't really at the level where her ESL needs could be addressed through LSA's classes. So she decided that she was going to join the parenting group in English. And so these two needs get addressed as one. And so it's like this need for parenting, which is phase one, but also the capacity building that would happen through her English language instruction. So she's essentially doing what I do with my students in class. She's learning language in a highly contextualized environment, and building relationships with these people through trusted alliances that are formed through these parenting classes. And then through the third phase, this idea of community building, organizing, and leadership, the idea that clients can take their newfound skills that they've learned in the community to advocate for positive change in the community at large. And that's really where we were like, well, we need a whole chapter on Melina, because having gone through the parenting classes in English at LSA, she then got recommended, I'm going to stop my share so I can see people's faces, for doing a job training program, and completed this job training program. And at the end of it, she needed to do a practicum. And so she decided she was going to do her practicum. She asked if she could do a practicum at LSA, and she hasn't left since. She was hired in the development office and then moved to administration, working for a former executive director, and then moved to the advocacy department. And so the idea is that in coming back to LSA, she didn't hoard all this knowledge that she'd gained through the years, right? She sent her children to high school. Two children are college graduates, and a third, I think, just started high school this year. And that all of this knowledge that she gained about raising her children in New York City as a Mexican immigrant, previously undocumented, she's working in the community, sharing that knowledge with the community and helping build up the community. And so it really made the story unique. I'll talk a little bit about the other chapter that focuses on the story of these other mothers. There were in total, including Melina, 19 mothers that we interviewed. They were all from Mexico, all from small towns in the states of Guerrero and Puebla, which really is representative of the populations that have been coming to New York in more recent years from Mexico. And these mothers on average had 3 children who ranged in age at the time of our interview from 6 to 28. And so really what connected them in our research was that they all had participated in parenting programs at LSA, but at the same time, they're also engaged in other parts of the organization, whether it's nursing or tutoring, whether they receive food pantry. Some of them volunteer today, some of them still receive services. And so I think for us, just seeing the breadth of different experiences in these 19 mothers was really amazing. I want to focus on one thing that, and then I'm going to conclude, but one thing that was really clear in talking to these mothers about their experience with LSA in the parenting classes and the socialization groups, many of them brought up this word convivencia. It's a word that means being with others, living together not in spite of, but because of, right? That they're learning to be together and sharing space and creating community together. And so I'll just kind of close with this idea that through this programming, these mothers found profound solidarity in their community, right? These are mothers that have often come to the United States young. They haven't been able to even, get a middle school education in Mexico, and they're alone in New York. And all of the challenges that New York presents when they are in an organization that is so locally focused and that is really helping these families really see the strengths and build those strengths up. Those feelings of loneliness are ameliorated in a sense that really makes possible the future growth. And so I think I'll just close with that. There's so much more that we could say. I know that the students, I know that the students have really kind of dug into some of the chapters, and so I'm curious about that. But just to kind of end by saying what Brenna said, hopefully we're moving toward publication, and hopefully by next year, the book will be out. But what this work has really made possible for us is like future collaborations. There are interns right now at Fordham, from Fordham, who are working at LSA. Some of it has nothing to do with me and Brenna. And I think that that is really beautiful, that this has moved into other departments at the university, and that this collaboration is growing in a kind of more organic way, and that it's not ours. It really is much larger. Yeah, and that I will just say that as we move forward, I think that everybody is aware of the fact that when a university collaborates with a community organization, there's a lot of kind of relationship building and moving slowly, right? And we're in that process, right? There's a history of kind of extractive knowledge, universities going in, taking what they want and moving away. And so I think that to name that and to be aware of that, and to be actively thinking about that as we in LSA move forward in this work is really important. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple words of conclusion before we open it up. Thank you so much, Carey. A couple takeaways I would really want the students to think about, and if we want to talk about it, great. If not, I just want to kind of leave you with this: is, it is very overwhelming, I think, to read the news, and there is so many horrible things happening in this country. And I always have thought that the very best thing you could do is just sort of find who is doing some good work and start a relationship, and relationships. And I've learned that more deeply through LSA, but it was me, living in New York, not sure, wanting to be involved in some way, and kind of just reaching out to some organizations, and Trish Gao, who I think is on our Zoom, who has been head of of LSA's volunteer services for so long, is just so incredibly welcoming. I mean, and she really embodies the spirit of LSA. She is, a truly wonderful East Harlem leader herself, who was involved as a volunteer, live-in volunteer, and now is an incredible leader at the agency. So welcomes all volunteers into the agency to feel like we really belong, and they value our collaboration. And when I went there to volunteer, I noticed something that if you ever notice, like, these are the good organizations. I went there, and you walk into the building on 115th Street, and I couldn't tell who were the staff, who were the volunteers, who were the families being served. It was, looking at sort of you could tell kind of a young Latino teenager who I overheard him saying he was waiting for his asylum case to go through. He was stocking one of the food pantry shelves next to a very wealthy woman who I got to know later, lives in the Upper East Side. I remember she had leopard print tight jeans on and heels. But you think about, like, where do you ever see in the city? It's not impossible, but it's rare where you see kind of our typical hierarchies and divisions around class, around race, around language. Where do you see those scrambled up in a good way? That wasn't the Upper East Side woman was serving, this Latino woman. They were together volunteering, and chatting and volunteering. And LSA really, really encourages so many of the families that get services to develop their leadership and become volunteers. And many of the volunteers have become staff. And that's very, very rare to have an agency that is staffed by so many local people in the neighborhood. But if you're overwhelmed, not sure what to do, just partner, with an agency and just see where it leads you. I began just dropping off cookies and baby carrots to the after school program. And that was like 12 years ago. And it's really developed to really one of the most important relationships in my life, I would say, with the people of LSA and the organization. And then two other quick things by way of conclusion, that I want the students to think about. that one of my favorite journalists, Krista Tippett, says that we all have a bias to be more interested in what is catastrophic and frightening and failing, and take that more seriously than what kind of quietly flourishes and works well in our society. I think, neuroscientists are just telling us now that our brains are mobilized by threat or fear, and our media companies kind of know that, that gets clicks, like really, really emphasizing constant catastrophe. But we really pay less attention, I think, often in the humanities too, in academia, of just what is working well, and what is working well. And this is not to say LSA is perfect, that there hasn't been challenges. Of course, this is humanity, and humanity working on very little resources. But there are incredible people who are building on the ideas of very, very, very smart women who have partnered with although also local people who are very, very smart and capable, who have become incredibly strong in the neighborhood. And I just think in the humanities, we can pay, in social sciences, it wouldn't hurt us to pay a little bit more attention to what is quietly flourishing and doing well, and study those sort of with as much academic and analytic prowess and seriousness as we do with what is sort of catastrophic and violent. So I encourage you to think of future projects like this. And the final thing, just to circle back to my original comment of how this research has for me so been dedicated to Sister Suzanne, who we lost. And one of my favorite recent memories of Sister Suzanne was stopping by their convent, which is just a couple blocks up from the agency on 115th Street. And I just went and rang her doorbell and told her that I was walking to the agency, and I just wanted to say hi and see how she was doing. And she said she was walking to the agency. And so we walked there together, walked the 2 blocks together. And, East Harlem is one of the most low-income parts of New York City. It has the highest rate of child poverty, one of the highest rates of asthma, one of the hardest hit by COVID. So you can kind of drive through it or look around and feel deprivation or feel nervous, just you feel worried and you want to help. But, and then you walk down there with Sister Suzanne, who's lived in the neighborhood since 1973. Everybody says hi to her. This little boy was pushing his scooter, and she said, "Oh, he's so cute. Look at how cute he is. I've seen him grow up." And she made a joke and said, "Just don't ask me what his name is. I'm getting so old, I forget names." But she knew these mothers. And suddenly you kind of see, what these sweet families, these good families, these beautiful kids, that you just like walking with Sister Suzanne, you don't see the poor, in need of rescue, but you see people, beautiful families and friends, people with assets and strengths. And you just see how she really meant it when she said she just considers herself blessed to live in the neighborhood, and how differently, because of not just her, but so much because of her, but because of people like her and other people at LSA, I see East Harlem so differently too. And it's incredible that, because of her and Sister Margaret and Melina, but also the incredible current staff like Monica, Sergio, Ray, Melina, Trish, Ray, JD, there's so many other people. There's, I think, about over 30 people who work there right now, that this has been going on since 1958 in East Harlem, and it still is going on. And there is still, so much more we could say, so many more studies that could even be done, and certainly so many more stories to tell. So thank you so much for listening, as we just introduced kind of the tip of the iceberg of the project, but hope we gave you a sense. And we have 30 minutes that we wanted to leave open for questions. So Stephen, we'll let you facilitate that part of the program.
All right, thank you so very much. So first of all, a round of applause for our presenters. Thank you so much for telling us about, this really great organization. And to everybody in the audience, I will say, if you're interested in asking a question, please raise your hand in the Zoom function and I will, call on you. Or if you want to ask a question in the chat, you can ask it in the public chat or chat me privately. But I'll go ahead and kick us off with something that I was sort of curious about, and it sort of connects up to, I think, both of your concluding remarks. And that is like, so this idea, this philosophy of mutuality seems to be really important, and, you know, seems to be something that has struck both of you. And I'm sort of curious, has your own work been influenced in any ways by this idea of mutuality? Have you been encouraged to try to think about how either your teaching, your scholarship, or your work with LSA could be more directly influenced by that philosophy?
I can start and say that I think that this research happened in tandem with the development of a project that I'm working on called the Initiative on Migrants, Migration, and Human Dignity. We just got 2 years of funding to promote research and faculty and student engagement on issues of migration at the US-Mexico border in New York City and at Fordham itself. And so that certainly is driven by ideas of mutuality. I also think a lot of this work made me think about ways of listening. I think that listening to so many hours of stories of women talking about how they came to this country, what raising children in this country is like, what it's like to be an immigrant woman alone in East Harlem. Yeah, it just made me think about, what does it mean to listen, right? Because it's not that I listened in Spanish to these interviews. The Spanish is like a party trick. It's that I listened. And so what does it really mean to listen to each other? And so I keep thinking about that. That is a way, and as I, listen to other people's stories of migration, what does it mean to really listen? And what do we do with what we hear? So yeah, I think, but I'm not done thinking about it. I think it's cooking in there somewhere.
I think that's such a good question, Stephen. So I would, I would maybe answer it in two parts. I so have benefited, and my professional but also personal life has really been enriched by thinking more deeply about mutuality in the last couple of years. But one aspect, I mean, kind of one of the fundamental things about mutuality is like an understanding of the human person as deeply relational, right? That is like core to who we are. And of course, and even Sister Margaret quotes Eric Fromm. I mean, that isn't necessarily like an LSA invented thing, okay? That, psychology, that this is, a basic fact that lots of different social scientists and humanities people talk about. But how much I've thought about how infrequently we make good on that. Like in the universities, it's like we so often think in isolated terms. The dominant mode in our culture and in the university is so individualistic. You grade students as individuals. I publish book as individual. It is, we don't really live our lives relationally as much as we could. And so even just collaborating with Carey on this, and collaborating with the students and realizing how true it is, that is in so much of the LSA literature. Like there's so little you can do about anything alone, but in relationship and in partnership, you can do so much more. And so I have loved, working with Carey and the students, and it's really like, almost it relaxes you. It's like, it's not all up to me. You don't have to just white knuckle your way through everything and it's all on your shoulders. It's like a shared, this is a shared project. So that has been one thing. And then the other thing I would say is partly why I was attracted to LSA, as a theology professor. I just finished a book on something called spiritual friendship, which is kind of kindred, I'd say, to something like mutuality. But I have just seen in other aspects of my work, but I've seen it so true at LSA, of how these words in the humanities that can seem so soft and quaint, like mutuality, respect, friendship, love, care. I mean, those sound like such kind of innocuous, harmless words. And then the real stuff is like politics, policy, legislative. But it's like, no, you get to know these people in this community. This is really powerful stuff. I mean, lives are changed. And we haven't, we talk about elsewhere in the book, but even through the principle of developing leadership and asset base and mutuality, they have like amassed massive power in East Harlem, even successfully launched a lawsuit against NYCHA to force them to make some of the public housing units in East Harlem safer. So some of this stuff sounds soft and quaint, but it's totally powerful, because this is how power works. Power is amassed relationally and through relationships. So I think as someone who studies like spirituality and the kind of inner soft words are sort of my expertise, it's been a great joy to see how powerful something like this really is. So thank you for that great question.
So I'm actually curious about that relational element. In part, so I am curious about a somewhat extractive idea, which is how can we take the success here and use this as a model elsewhere? And I think about some of there could be the general structures in place, the general institutional things that help encourage relationships, and in particular, relationships of mutuality. But one thing about relationships is often about the specific people involved. And so you talk about, Sister Suzanne as like an animating spirit of, this work. And especially organizations that developed over time, like it might be partly because there were very specific personalities who, really helped to drive that work. And then the rest of the relationships, coalesced around those particular individuals. And so I'm curious, like, do you think, or what parts of this do you think could be, used as models elsewhere? And how much of this do you think is, particular to this very organization?
I'll just say the one thing that I think can be used elsewhere is the local based, right? And the time based, right? This is not an organization that's trying to change New York City or trying to influence New York City. It has a very clear definition. Brenna said 20 blocks, right? But it's focused on East Harlem. And I do think that is unique, and that the relationships that it cultivates are over generations in some cases. That this isn't like a quick fix, it's a long-term model. Brenna had something to say, and I also think Sister Margaret raised her hand. So I'll just put her in the queue for questions to you, Stephen.
Okay, thanks. That's another great question. I think just in terms of the replicable things, I think one of the things is building relationships with an organization. If you really want to make an impact, I mean, it just takes a long time, just to be thinking of putting in years with an organization and then figuring out what they need. I mean, they need short-term volunteers too. But for all of us, thinking about like really finding an organization you believe in and making a long-term, commitment, partnership commitment. So that's, I think, something much different than like quick check-in, check-out, quick summer, quick one-week projects, just thinking more long-term, relationships with organizations. And also I think in our culture, especially in America, we tend to think big is better, the bigger. And if you're successful, grow, get bigger, pop up all over. And it's like, sometimes that's really not the best model. So, one of my best friends is a principal of a really low income high school in Brooklyn, of special needs high school. And she knows a lot about LSA. She's donated a lot to LSA because of our friendship. And she really thinks, wouldn't the city be great if there was an organization like this all over the city that were really working on the health and empowerment of this couple miles or mile radius, but I think that's something to replicate as we kind of think about graduating and where do we want to make a difference and how do we want to make a difference and what do we want the world to look like. And then the other thing, Steve, that's a really good question about relationships. I think that's, one of the big things is, all over the world, there's incredible organizations that are founded by nuns, some priests, and that as many of that generation passes away, it is hard to imagine like the kind of animating spirit of who's going to take up that mantle. And they've done a really good job that mostly lay people and it's a secular organization now that are there, but I think all of us are really heartbroken and scared and sad, to think about when some of the original kind of founders are no longer with us, and not everyone does understand this relational model of mutuality. So part of kind of the impetus for the book was to have kind of the widest range of possible kind of get what this is all about. And also, it's just also become really clear to me that it's not just a Catholic thing or a nun thing. So we have a wonderful new CEO who I think is still on the Zoom. I know he was there in the beginning, Jonah Gensler, who's the head of LSA in East Harlem. And he's been there just a few months as our CEO. And he so gets it and is so wonderful. And there's so many people at LSA from all different faiths, no faiths, and who really, really do get this. So it is, the spirit is alive and well in many people, but it's a live question for those of us who are connected to some of these kind of faith-based organizations as we see this incredible generation, passing. So thank you. And Sister Margaret had her hand up. Stephen, did you want, you go ahead.
No, so yeah, so Sister Margaret. Oh, I think you're muted.
Why, unmuted me. All right, am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I just want to say, one of the things that we're really blessed with at the agency is I hear all these people talking. I'm thinking Carey has mutuality in her heart and spirit, and so does Brenna. And then I'm looking, and Trish is around here, who has run our education, our volunteer program for a number of years. There are a number of people that have it already. And all you need is the invitation to have it happen. And I think I'm so thrilled that you're thinking of dedicating the book to Suzanne, because she had mutuality in an acute way with everyone that came into her orbit, and particularly the kids and the women and the people who were struggling. And I remember hearing this story about this man who was extremely poor, and it was freezing outside, and she decided to go down to the agency, and no one else was there because it was the weekend. And the next thing, she had him in and helped him get washed up and gave him food and helped him be able to make his next step in life. So actually, I love mutuality. I think the very fact I was born a twin probably taught me a lot about mutuality from the very beginning. And but I have met so many people who live it and expand it and develop it. And whatever happened with this research, the very fact that Carey and Brenna focused on this was brilliant. So I just want to say, look at this group of people who are gathered here together, and you see how mutuality grows at the agency.
Thank you, Sister Margaret.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. That was really lovely. Thank you.
Jonah, your hand is up. Yes.
You. So I am the CEO of LSA Family Health Services as of September. And it's been a wonderful journey in partnership with many of you here in the room. For me, mutuality, I studied Paulo Freire many years ago, who was a Brazilian pedagogist, and just, he talks about we're all learners and teachers, teaching and learning from each other. And that speaks to me. And when I came to the organization and getting to know the sisters, I realized we really need each other. So the sisters, and they've said this very clearly to me, there's not a next generation of sisters coming. So the legacy of what we've built, they're concerned about that. And what I see in the organization is sort of the keepers of the flame, as Elizabeth had described them. Those are going to carry on this journey. Many of them coming from faith, but also faith in their community and in that connection. And so I'm confident that that spirit is very much alive and is going to continue and grow and evolve. And I know that as a leader, I get caught up in meetings about audits and about fundraising, and then Sister Annette will pull me aside to break bread together. And I need both of those things happening as a leader, and we all need that. And that to me is mutuality, to recognize that we need each other. You know, Sister Annette, Sister Margaret, we're going to carry on. We're going to do the work. And we also need you. We experienced that in Sister Suzanne's memorial, that sense of community. I'll say one more thing, which is, you know, everybody talks about social media and how we all connect. And no, we don't really connect with likes. What we connect with is really looking into each other's eyes, and that the sharing that happens, and it just breaks down so many barriers. So I feel it. It's strong, and it's very practical. That's the last thing I'll say. This isn't just about feeling good. It's about doing good work, because that connects to resources. It connects to motivating people. It connects to community change. And so I really want to leave you with that. And thank you.
Thanks, Jonah. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have one sort of question from the audience that is sort of, you know, questioning this kind of work. And so the question is, so living close to East Harlem and volunteering for food delivery there, it's really hard to see how a program that's been in place for so long has been successful. Sometimes I wonder if providing limited assistance eases the city's burden to provide the major assistance that's really required. So the problem persists despite goodwill efforts. I'm wondering if either of you, you know, have any reactions to that, or if, you know, those sorts of discussions were happening with, you know, things that you were, people you were talking to.
I think it's
Right.
such a good question. Go ahead, Brenna, you go first.
Okay, I think I so appreciate that. I mean, I think that's really, really good. And I think that is always a risk. And I think there's certain things that LSA has done to mitigate some of that. And then there's certain ways, there's habits that maybe some non-service providing nonprofits do that that aren't ideal for cities. Like, for example, that as, you know, wages have stagnated, as the city has gotten so much more expensive, yes, of course they love, you know, these social service providers, especially, of course, they love social service providers, you know, that have so many dedicated volunteers, and, you know, that of course the city relies on charity and service. But I think that LSA has a history of really not just doing social service provision. I mean, I know that even though they have, you know, a food bank on Wednesdays, that's not the end all goal. I think they want, you know, everyone in East Harlem, you know, to have their kids enrolled in a good school. And they do have a branch at the agency called Advocacy. So although it's like dedicated to the families that live there, you know, these are very, very smart people who have their eye on, you know, issues of legislation. The LSA staff and volunteers were really involved in getting the city to pass a law that you didn't have, that you could have a New York City ID for different, despite your immigration status, you know, and that helped things with police relationships and so forth. And so those are kind of making structural changes for people. But I agree. I mean, I know from like people in the Bronx and outside that live near Fordham, nobody wants in their neighborhood to have like tons of food banks in their neighborhood. They want good grocery stores, and they you know, want people to have living wages and good jobs. But I think that is the tension, and I appreciate that. What were you going to add, Carey?
I was just going to say that the agency doesn't always replace services, but work together with the city, right? I mean, that's what happened with early intervention. When early intervention services were first introduced in New York, LSA became a site that had early intervention services for kids, and that was in collaboration with the city. And the same, I think, is true. I don't know the language on this, but didn't the city just provide vouchers for childcare for the migrants who were arriving, and LSA became a site? I think I'm right on that. I'm looking at these faces, but that it's not always substituting, right? It's not always letting the city off the hook, but they're working together in collaboration with. And that there are these umbrella organizations like the NYIC, the New York Immigration Coalition, that works with all different kinds of nonprofit organizations and CBOs throughout the city, and does the work of uniting them and helping them all have a common agenda to work with the city, but also doing the advocacy work to get legislation changed. So I think it's a really good question, but I think it's more complicated than that too. I think it's happening on lots of different levels.
Great, thank you. So I'm sort of curious about the health part of this and the connection to all the other services that are going on here. So it sounds to me like this is, such a multifaceted organization, that there's so many, different, pieces here. Is there still like a central focus on health and then connects these other things to health, or is that just it was based in health and now it's just expanded to be everything provider? Or
Yeah, that's a good question, because that's actually the subject of some discussion at LSA, but there still is a focus on health. It's called LSA Family Health Services, the organization. But this is something, so I'll say a little bit more about this, but this is another thing I would really want the students at Fordham to think about as a takeaway, that often our pre-health students are on a track at Fordham. It's like you cannot veer. If you've got to do your organic chemistry, your bio, if you're going to work in the health sciences, med school, dental school, it's a very particular track. And then we have the humanities and the social sciences tracks. But the way in which they currently deal with the health issues, and this is connected to their history, is more than just, there are nurses on staff that go out and, do vaccines and health checks and wellness checks and all that basic stuff, but really thinking about kind of how health is a community issue. And there's health indicators in East Harlem that they very much are working on, such as the new nutrition, and even something we learned through the motherhood group that's in the book, the PCD program, even working on the mother's confidence, even confidence about breastfeeding, or confidence to help her child hold a rattle and track the baby's progress. All of that are incredibly important for the infant's health and well-being and future development. And so it's not just as sort of narrowly focused on nurses going into homes, but I think it is pretty fascinating that we still have a team of nurses going into homes. And still very much on our board. One of our board members is a medical doctor at Mount Sinai, and a lot of the Mount Sinai medical students have projects at LSA and are involved with LSA and work on many of the programs there. And there's also, an asthma program on asthma remediation. So it's sort of health in the broader context of, I'd say, community health, but it's still there. But I know one of the debates is, okay, what if a need emerges in the neighborhood, such as, around immigration rights, they do that. That doesn't directly maybe lend itself to thinking about broad health, such as like parenting and nursing and so forth. And so how much should we attend to things that's more indirect? Oh, and yeah, Monica's adding to the chat. We have an incredible mental health services program that Monica runs brilliantly, art therapy and mental health. It's incredible. So it is health, broadly conceived, but it is still a debate of how much should that be just kind of the orienting center of gravity in relation to things like legal services and so forth.
Yeah, so that was actually the mental health thing was going to be my next question. Given that, many of the people who are served by this organization or who participate in this organization have experienced, various forms of trauma. It seems like the connecting them, developing relationships between them and other people is part of that trauma healing process. But I was curious about what other sorts of ways in which that part is addressed.
Yeah, Monica, would you mind sharing a bit about your work?
No, not at all. Hi, Monica Sanchez. Thank you for this. I'm very excited. So, I'm glad that you're asking the question. So, I read the book, and so I have some insight, and I'm very excited to understand that mental health has been at the core since the beginning, because it always has been issues for mental health. what is different now is I think that we were able to find creative ways to really engage a community that we were not able to engage, that they were not able to engage before, and the way that we're engaging in now. The main element of the healing is, of course, the connection with the clients. It's the first thing that we do. We're connecting with the clients, and after you connect with the clients, you really develop that relationship that is needed when somebody has so much trauma. And then we use art therapy, and we also use the wisdom and the strength and resilience of our clients, who are really the masters of everything that happens. They are the teachers. They are the one who has been surviving and really teaching us how to serve better the community. I'm part of the landscape. I live in East Harlem for 20 years. So I'm part of the people who immigrate here, who has been able to do things. And then our clients are, of course, really amazing. So we're working really hard to get other organizations that really continue supporting high needs of care, of course. We are not a mental health clinic. We are a nonprofit, a community organization. And so we are kind of like understanding the limitation, but also we're giving family support, and it's art therapy family support. The gateway really is the mom, because that's the clients that I serve beginning. And then from there, supporting the mom with the children and the whole family. So it's a completely holistic, really program, where it's not only the mom, it's the whole family who we're supporting. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So I have another question from the audience, and this is more about like your work, in particular your research. So great presentation, wonderful organization. I'd be curious to hear what the authors have found to be the greatest challenge in their research, other than the pandemic, and like what were some of the stumbling blocks that you might have come across in doing this research?
Carey, you want to go first?
I'm thinking, I mean, the pandemic was the biggest one, I would say. I don't know. I mean, from a very personal perspective, I've found it really motivating to be accountable to someone. It's made me think about how writing academics write in such private ways, and we torture ourselves privately about that. And when you're more public and you're accountable to someone, maybe there's less time for torture and you just have to send somebody something. And living with being a little imperfect, that's really not my comfort zone. And I've had to get more comfortable with that, right? Because I told Brenna I was going to send her something, and I just have to do it. That's not about the challenges. I think that's about some of the things that I've learned and grown from. I'm trying to think about the challenges. You have one, Brenna?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I am, trained in the history of religion and the history of Catholicism, and a lot of my research takes place in Europe. And this my LSA work came more out of my personal life as a volunteer and a mother and a citizen, and then turning that into research was a challenge, because I don't have, my PhD or coursework or my comprehensive exams were not on immigration or East Harlem. And that really is such an East Harlem story. And there is such a fraught history of kind of white people coming in and acting like they can tell the story for people. So I felt nervous about, coming into this new area of research. And that was, I think, I wouldn't call it a stumbling block, but truly challenging. Like, I had so much to read to catch up, and I still don't feel 100% confident on that. But I think one of the things about LSA, it's truly is such also an international story. It is anchored in LSA, but the nuns were originally a French order of nuns. Their mother house is still in Paris, and many of them, many of the sisters have lived all over the world. I mean, it's an international order. So that part of the story is not just about East Harlem. And even in East Harlem, women were coming from, Puerto Rico and different parts of Mexico, and they're coming from all over the world. So it's sort of like this global story in this small period. But the thing is too, and this is something I would take away for students, like, you can so rely on other excellent scholars. There's some really incredible books about East Harlem. And thank God, like I didn't have to write those books, but we could read them and incorporate those in our research. And one of the really wonderful things that happened is the press just sent the draft of our book out to 2 readers. One who's an incredible Mexican scholar of Mexican New York who teaches at Lehman College and who gave us an incredible reader report, like a ton of challenging things, she said, and things we need to, you know, more books that we could read and a couple different framing things. So it's like, you don't have to do this alone, you know, but we really had to rely on a lot of really wonderful scholars who paved the way for us and, you know, really taught us so much about East Harlem. But a stumbling block was my limited academic background when it came to just the East Harlem part of the book.
All right, so I'd like to fit in one more question. And Melina, I see that your hand is up.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to say thank you to Brenna, Carey, and Fordham. And I wanted to highlight why the mission of the Little Sisters has been important and it's hard. And it has to do with mutuality, it has to do with respect, it has to do with acceptance. The power of growth is in relationships, and we have seen it here. Our relationship with Fordham has grown through the years and it's continued growing because of the relationship we have built. And this is what we're trying to do with our clients, with our partners, with anyone who comes through our doors. The mission will continue even when they're not here, when our little sisters are not here no longer. And we know that. It is when acceptance, when we see each other as individuals, as human beings, instead of seeing our color, the skin, our race, our choice of who we love or who we believe or where we came from, is when we start seeing each other's originally. Thank you to all of you having here tonight. It is because of the power of growth that we're going to continue the mission in East Harlem. And I wish there was LSA in each borough. So because we're not trying to change the city, we are trying to change those who come through our doors. We are trying to change individuals who come through our doors. Yes, the city is important for a lot of the resources that we have, but it's always those who have less who receive less as well. So when the city opens programs around the New York City, it's always those who have less, always those who are undocumented immigrants, our family, low-income families who receive less. So LSA's mission is not to change the New York City, New York State. LSA's mission is to change one person at a time. And the history of the Little Sisters will continue thanks to their dedication, the love that they have put through each person that comes through those doors. And to all of you who are here, your faces, Gail, Lorraine, Laura, Carey, thank you so much for the continued work and support through our doors. You are the people who are going to continue our doors open. You are going to be the people who passing the word with your co-workers, your families, like as Brenna was saying, sharing our mission wherever you go. It is what makes us unique. And the people who come to our doors is the people who keep supporting us. So thank you, all of you. And thank you, Carey and Brenna, for mentioning my name. We're just only doing God's work. And let us say, God, in every way you see God.
Thank you, Melina.
Thank you
What
so
a
very much.
beautiful way to close our evening. Thank you, Melina.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. And so I want to once again give a warm round of applause to Carey and Brenna, excuse me. Thank you so much for sharing these stories, for telling us about this organization. And yeah, we look forward to reading more of the book.
Thank you very much for your support, Stephen.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you to the Center for your support.